So Ponce Health is the only longevity company that actually has demonstrated safety and efficacy in 3 different models: the C. elegans model, the blackjack 6 mouse model, and then now in humans. So this is a quote from Dr. Brian Kennedy, who is our Chief Science Officer. When we decrease biologic age, people live healthier for longer. This benefits the individual, their family, the healthcare provider, the insurer, and their government. And so, if you take a look historically at how we've been practicing medicine, it's been largely the disease approach. And so with the onset of disease, we start treating you with medications, et cetera, lifestyle changes. And over the last 50 years, we've been able to increase lifespan by about 10 years. Only about 2 years of that has been health span. So most of it has been the extension at the end of life, which is not obviously high quality. So the area under the curve basically is suffering and death. The reason our industry exists basically is to try and extend health span by pushing out the onset of morbidity and increasing the number of years of disease-free living, i.e. health span. So the dream is to compress morbidity, where you actually increase disproportionately the number of years of healthy living, disease-free living, and then you compress the period of time in which you actually are ill prior to death. Now, this last one actually is great from a policy point of view because you then decrease the amount of cash spent basically on healthcare, because the time period in which people are sick prior to death, which is obviously the largest portion of cash used in treating people in the healthcare system, is compressed. And we have now demonstrated this in the mouse model. So what causes human aging and how does Rejuvant work? We believe that aging is primarily a software problem, not a hardware problem, where the genome is a bit more like hardware, not a perfect analogy, and the epigenome is a bit more like software. And then aging is caused by changes to the epigenome due to damage in the passage of time, i.e. corruption or drift. So how does this work? Again, we believe that lifespan is largely epigenetically determined rather than being genetically predetermined. And the way Rejuvant works is it rebalances your DNA methylation patterns, which we believe to be the gold standard for measuring biologic age in humans and in some animal models, to that of when you were younger, which then, resets gene expression and decreases epigenetic age. And when you reset gene expression, basically the software is changed back to what it was when you were younger. This manifests itself in physiologic changes. So it upregulates good gut bacteria and downregulates harmful bacteria. And I'll show this to you in my own personal gut biome in a few minutes. It increases stem cell production. It also blocks cytokine signaling of senescent cells, thus reducing chronic inflammation, which many believe to be the cause of tumor formation and progression. And it does this without killing senescent cells. It increases the ability of red blood cells to carry oxygen, thus increasing endurance and also increasing healing time. So let's take a look at the epigenetics of, quote, natural aging. So when you're born, all of your DNA repeat sites are all methylated, and the promoter sites. The CPG islands are the exact opposite. They are completely unmethylated. And so the CPG island sites represent maybe 20 to 30% of the genome, and the repeat sites are about 70%. So as you get older, aging is primarily a hypomethylated process. Your repeat sites become demethylated, and that then, of course, changes gene signaling. So, and your CPG sites are the reverse. They are unmethylated to begin with and become methylated over time. So one of the remarkable things we noticed in one of our first mouse studies, which was then published in Cell Metabolism, was that when we started the animals in control and test group, they were at 6 months of age, or excuse me, 18 months of age, which is about human equivalent of, 55, 60. So many of the mice had gray hair in both groups. However, at the first reading, 3 months after using calcium alpha-ketoglutarate, glutarate, they couldn't find any gray hair on the test group in the mice. So that's indicative of not simply slowing down or even stopping the aging process. That's indicative of potentially reversing that process. Trying to understand how that possibly could be actually going on physiologically led us to believe that perhaps CpG island sites, which are demethylated, might control hair pigmentation or health. And if we were able to reverse that once they had been turned off by methylation and then turn them back on again, that pigmentation might resume. And so that's just, of course, a theory, but it was observed. And only later, on in the mouse life did they get gray hair again. So just kind of interesting. So this was the paper that was published in Cell Metabolism. What you're looking at here is the control group and the test group at about the human equivalent of age 70, close to the end of life. You can see the guys on the left, they don't look too good. The guys on the right, they look pretty darn good. And if this was a movie, the folks on the right would be running around in their cages. The ones on the left barely are mobile at all. And so the conclusion of the paper was we increased lifespan by around 12%. That actually got up to about 15 with another study. But that's also, keep in mind that the mice weren't treated until relatively late in life. But importantly, we increased the health span by 41%. It also compressed morbidity by 46%. From a policy point of view, this is the only thing I have ever seen that could potentially reduce the amount of GDP that the United States spends on healthcare, which is around 19% right now, back to perhaps maybe 13%, which would be a huge savings. Again, by giving you more disease-free years, there's less time that you would then spend in the hospital. So it was statistically significant for postponing the onset of frailty, including graying of hair, hair loss, curvature of the spine, tremors, and gait disorders, i.e. walking without balance. We then moved into humans, and this study was published in Aging. So in this study, there was a group of 42 subjects. This data actually isn't even ours. It's owned by TrueMe, the company that makes the DNA methylation test that we provide for those who subscribe. And in this study, we found 42 subjects who had taken a DNA methylation test prior to beginning Rejuvant, and then had been on it for an average of 7 months, and then retested using the same methylation test. And the result was, on the average, subjects who did that got an additional 8 years of, they reduced their biologic age by 8 years, which is quite remarkable, with a p-value of 6.5 times 10 to the negative 12th. I've been around the healthcare industry a long time. I've never seen a human study with a p-value quite like that. So it's noteworthy, as Dr. Kennedy said, making the natural product cocktail an intriguing candidate to affect human aging. And Rejuvant contains it's a combination that contains all endogenous materials, compounds which are naturally made by your body. However, their ability to make them declines dramatically over time. We then did a prospective randomized placebo-controlled trial using Rejuvant at a medical school, Indiana University Medical School in Indianapolis. However, we started the trial in January 2020. And this is a song which people probably will be singing for quite some time who ran trials through the pandemic. But obviously the medical center was shut down for a long period of time. It took over a year to enroll the patients. And a byproduct of that study, which was not anticipated, was that the only people who were willing to come in during the pandemic were very healthy and very young. And so when the study was finished, we found that our subjects had an average biologic age of being 7 years younger than their chronologic age. And as the previous study points out, we can give you about an 8-year benefit, but those folks all were slightly older than their chronologic age. The people who wound up being in this study were basically in the top 3% of the population. And so, what we did learn, however, was that it was safe and that it still had an effect on your biologic age of 3 years, but it wasn't quite statistically significant. If we would have cut off enrolled subjects at no younger than 5 years, younger than their chronologic age, it would have been statistically significant. So we hope to raise enough cash to do another study, but that's sort of the results. So what does this look like on an individual basis? As the founder of the company and one of the primary inventors of the product, I've been on it longer than anybody else, about almost 5 years now, over 4.5 years. So what you're looking at on the top in the red is my chronologic age, and these were not even time periods, so the line is not completely straight. And then I had begun taking Rejuvant about 9 months before we found a biologic age test that was commercially available and not astonishingly expensive. And so my first biologic age test showed that I was 18 or 19 years younger than my chronologic age. And again, I had been on Rejuvant for about 9 months prior to that. Then if you take a look at the first 6 data points, and then plot a line using regression analysis, you'd see that line would be a similar slope to my chronologic age. However, the last 6 data points, if you plot a line there, that is pronouncedly downward or decreasing biologic age as my chronologic age increases. So theoretically, one could suggest that in the last 1.5 years, I have achieved longevity escape velocity, meaning that I'm getting younger faster than I am getting older. I'm obviously not immortal. 6 data points, even with a very high R value, would imply you could predict the next data point fairly accurately, but obviously not to infinity. It is nevertheless kind of interesting. So one of the other factors that Dr. Kennedy has been studying at the National University of Singapore has been how gut biome health has changed in the mouse model. Those mice taking calcium alpha-ketoglutarate, glutarate, our proprietary calcium alpha-ketoglutarate. Glutarate. And so my gut biome, I decided I would take a test, and I sent away a sample, and they sent me back a very long report. This is part of what the analysis, which was done at National University of Singapore, to compare me to the mice. And so these are all of the bacteria found in my gut biome, and the 0 point is the median for humans. And so you can see I am above it in all cases, but strikingly above it in a couple of very interesting ways. And so these were noted by the folks from NUS. In their report to me, they said that I ate too much protein, that I didn't eat enough leafy vegetables, that I was probably overweight. And I started thinking that sounds a lot like my mother. But nevertheless, the data was quite interesting. So a 6.6 increase showing that the mucid layer may be greatly increased. And of course, this is the lining in the gut, contributes to stopping leaky gut, which Dr. Kennedy and we believe is a key cause of the aging process. And 100 times increase in this compound would suggest that AKG is increasing the colonic glutamine and glutamate populations. And we also believe that this is directly related to longevity. And so, again, physiologic changes that have been occurring in my body, and I could talk about other anecdotal things such as vision, dental health, physical endurance, those kinds of things, but they only represent my own personal case. So from a commercial point of view, what's the willingness to pay for longevity? So if you have a couple $1,000,000, you're willing to give up a third of your wealth to pick up an extra 10 years of healthy living. And if you recall from the human study, we're looking at an 8-year average. If you have $50 million, you'd be giving up to half. So if anybody in the audience falls into one of those latter categories, I'd certainly love to talk to you. So the product is actually commercially available, although not many people have heard of it because I spent all of our cash on science and I don't have any money left for marketing. So it is a non-pharmaceutical GRAS compound, generally regarded as safe, no anticipated customer safety issues. And we have a patent that's actually issued. We have another one, PTC patent in Europe that's with claims allowed just about to issue. And then several moving through all major countries in the United States in various stages of prosecution. So we are commercial. We have a relatively small customer base that managed to hear about us. And so the lifetime value, which is a key measure of how successful a product is about $900, where the industry average is less than $3. Our average order value is about $135, and our reorder rate, which is pretty astonishing, is a little over 80%. And that is a measure basically of how satisfied people are. Most people who go on the product have success and they feel something in a relatively short period of time, and therefore they stay on the product long term. And there are some real advantages to being on the product long term. We have some data which is not yet published, which is quite astonishing about the extent of remodeling going on in my epigenome personally. So going to market, we have an IP protected product. FDA approval is not required in terms of safety and efficacy, but notification, which has occurred, is required. And we have independent clinical data demonstrating both safety and efficacy. Safety has now been demonstrated in a human trial that was prospective, randomized, controlled, and statistically significant. So the other places we're taking a look are medical foods, which I find very intriguing, turning junk food into health food. And we've got some folks who have expressed some interest in doing that for us. A cosmetic product, which would be topical, also of interest and with some interesting data. And then an age-decreasing beverage, which we are working on with a partner. Age-decreasing pet foods, we have a partner who wants to work with us and we're in discussions with. And then also animal feed, for example, feeding chickens to increase egg-laying capacity, milk production in cattle, even equine and aquaculture. So we've spent about $1.7 million, I think, so far on intellectual property, which is an awful lot for an early stage company, especially although I don't consider us to be a supplement company. That was a strategy because drugs take so long and the risk is astonishingly high. And I was interested in trying to find something that would be helpful to my parents who are now in their late 80s and taking Rejuvant. So this is basically most of the patents. We've actually had a couple more that have been filed. Our financial projections basically suggest that if we could raise $7 or $8 million, we could get to cash flow break even. And so we are taking a look at raising a C round right now. We've raised about 14 million to date, including debt and equity. Founders retained about 43% at this point in time. And the key milestones for this next round basically are the multi-centered, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, repeating the trial we did at Indiana University, except this time, we will exclude patients who are dramatically younger than their chronologic age to start with, which is way outside the bullseye for our market anyway and represent a very small percentage of the population. Build out the senior management team, begin approval process in China and Japan, begin paid media campaigns, which we currently can't afford, to develop new products such as pets and cosmetics and expand our distribution channels. And so, we are looking at an exit in about 2 to 3 years with a successful clinical trial based on the trial results we had at IU. We believe the likelihood of success is very high. And that if we then have a prospective RPC trial, we think that we would be a prime acquisition candidate and also a prime IPO candidate. So in summary, it's the first and only available product of any kind to decrease biologic age in humans with this kind of result. It's all naturally endogenous components, ingredients. We have proof of concept in animals, now in humans. It's a very fast growing market, massive unmet demand for an age decreasing product of any kind. We have initial traction with recurring revenue and an effective business model as it is subscription based. We have wonderful people working here. And, the landscape is very hungry for deals like this. It's an unprecedented opportunity to invest in a clinically proven, commercially ready longevity product and a $10 million Series C round with visibility to liquidity and exit in about 2 years. And this basically says that you shouldn't believe anything that I just told you. And if you would like to get in touch with me, that's pretty easy. And the QC there will take you directly to the landing page. So if anyone has any questions, I think there's maybe a minute or two, I'd be happy to try and answer. I would also say, however, that the questions would need to be repeated. Having listened to a few previous presentations, I couldn't hear any of the questions being asked. So with that, I'll end my presentation.
Thomas, hello, my name is
Yes.
Andre. So are you using yourself Rejuvant?
Yes, as I showed you my data after having taken it for about almost 5 years now, that was my personal gut biome and my biologic age chart over that period of time.
Okay. And what is your passport age?
I'm sorry, what was my what?
What is your chronological passport age? Is it okay if I ask you?
Oh, of course. I'm 67 years old.